ladies and gentlemen. 2020. Happy New Year. Yeah. I'm talking about, folks, you've been waiting for it. Thank you very much for your patience. Really excited about the opportunity today. We have John Hogue with us, and such an amazing person. HogueProphecy.com. John's a legend. He's been on the show many times before. This is a New Year's special, and we're going to talk about some Nostradamus prophecies. We're going to get into some recent prophecies and, I should say, astrotheological aspects that John has put together that's available on his website as well. So a lot of information to present for you folks. Really excited about the opportunity. And before we get started, I just wanted to show something to y'all real quick, because a lot of you have been asking me about tradelikeagenius.com. I've been getting emails on a regular basis, and I want to show you essentially what it is. So I'm going to take you to my emails real quick. Here we go. Okay, so this is my email, and you see I just typed in TradingView, and this shows you the emails that I get. I could get more or I could get less. But what's neat about tradelikeagenius.com is there's these proprietary algorithms, and they're specifically designed to give you a trade alert when specific parameters are met. So it's so much more efficient than somebody that is emotional. Even some of the best traders in the world, these algorithms are first class. So give you a quick example. You scroll through here and you can see here that recently there was a silver miner buy alert. So what that is it's essentially a stock connected to to a company that mines silver. And there's some incredible opportunities, not just in cryptos, but the silver miners. And then this, you click on it. I'm actually going to click on something else here. I'm going to click on a crypto coin, which is called Zcash. Zcash right there. So if I go down here to the trade alert, I click on that. No, that's the wrong one. Let me go back here real quick. Bingo, bingo. Wrong one. Here we go. Zcash. This is the Zcash right here. And this is the actual chart that pulled up. So here we go. Okay. So you can see here Zcash. And if you've never heard of Zcash before, it's just an altcoin. This is just one of many examples. There's a ton of them. But you can see right here, here's the coin market cap. You can see the market cap right here, the volume, the price. This right here shows you the details. And then you can see why. You can see these spikes right here. Well, these trade alerts will essentially give you the upper, like, as soon as it comes out, the algos pick up on it. They send you an email, you open it up, and then you have an opportunity to buy or to sell. So I just wanted to show that to you real quick. It's at tradelikeagenius.com. Go to tradelikeagenius.com, and you can take courses. You can get the trade alerts. Use the code Leak Project or Holiday. Let them know Leak Project sent you. It's a great opportunity. All right, John, let's rock and roll, man. I mean, you have been putting out all sorts of information on your website, HogueProphecy.com. You have a fantastic newsletter. You also talk to people individually. You set up times to speak with people individually. So if you would, man, like, what do we have the opportunity to look forward to in 2020? Because what you sent me seems like it's a big deal. There's a lot going on.
I mean, I'm setting off those final batch of articles for 2019, and already we're tossed into this first day or two of the new year, and we've already got a situation happening in Iraq and Syria that is as serious, if not more serious, than the drone incident in June, where a lot of the deep state around Trump were trying to push him into a strike onto Iran as a reprisal. And in the last minute, Mr. T tended to look at this and say, but hey, why should we kill 150 people for a robot plane? And so he pulled back. And I tell you from a prophetic angle, that even though it looked like, oh, yeah, well, that was just an interesting experience, we literally were 10 minutes away from a major war in the Middle East, setting it off fire that could drag as Nostradamus predicts, the Russians and the Americans into a direct confrontation, and the Chinese, which could have been World War III. So that danger passed, but just Sunday, another attempt to kind of the swamp folks around Mr. T are just getting him kind of ready to be kind of pushed into, through their advice, since T is an open channel of a guy. He channels whatever's around him, and they were pushing Pres T into, right now, another situation which has a higher likelihood than the last one of dragging this scenario into our lives before a week is out in the new year. It's just the beginning of what is the first year of a decade of literally this. In the biggest picture of this, we've talked about the Aquarian age since 20 years now, whether even all the way back to the 60s, whether the Aquarian age is now slowly eclipsing the kind of patriarchal, centrist, central banking, central economy, central control of the paternal over the plebs, the people, that with blind belief and blind faith being the core of religious concentrations of the last 2,000 years of the Piscean age. Now we are truly in the 2020s entering the first truly major travail of the birth of a new age, a 20th century period where science will slowly eclipse blind belief, blind faith, where person-to-person interaction on the entire planet will supersede and transcend nationalism, and globalism, which is another kind of form of a internationalistic control of the world. So nationalism, globalism, centralized religious isms, all of that is going to be, in the classic example of the Aquarian age, we begin in the 2020s to feel out and hopefully survive the challenges to become something that's even beyond democracy, or what we really have is mobocracy in this time, where the mob rules, the lowest common denominator rules in our arts, in our politics, in our religious understandings. And there's a deep urge in this new age for the individual to be the most sacred unit of the human race. Not equal. No one is equal. Everyone is equally unique. And that is the motto of the Aquarian age. And what is coming in the Aquarian age is in the first half of this new, what I call the roaring 2020s. And I call it the roaring 2020s for 30 years now, because it's not like the roar of a big party that people necessarily had, especially in America after the terrible loss of innocence of the First World War that brought us into the existential crisis of our modern times. No, this is the 100 years later, this is the roar of people waking up, or this is the roar of people who are fed up of certain control systems of the last 20 centuries of the Piscean age, still trying to keep people down, central banks still trying to retard and suppress the growth of the future economies of cryptocurrency, person-to-person interaction. And it starts with money, as it often does. The simple need of bartering and selling is what kind of started civilization thousands of years ago. But now it's more than that. It's a blockchain understanding where everything is sourced, where people know where it comes from and where it's going. But people will be the struggle will come in the 2020s, where people will begin to want to be empowered for their individual selves and not have any central government or censoring commons privatized, keep them under control. Now, of course, those forces that have been doing that habitually now for 20 centuries or more they're not going to go, oh, okay, that sounds nice. Go ahead. They're going to try to stop this. They're going to try to suppress this. They're going to try to take a free revolutionary information revolution that we've been in and turn it against us, to become a thing algorithmically that magnifies people's narcissism without them even knowing it, to buy and sell stuff that the machine decides is what you want, then direct you to further to other things that you want. The most important shift of challenge that's happened in the information revolution has been one from a passive, oh, let me just hit me with whatever's out there. And so, because there's a lot of things that I discover that I never seek or search for, things that I would never dream to understand, but in a system where you get to see it all just come at you, at all the different things going on in the world, that's now changing to the opposite pole, to control you, to make you say, okay, now it's up to you. We're going to empower you to search for whatever you want to find. But in that is this reality, this clever trick that the whole world is vast, and there may be so many things that you don't know anything about that you would love to know about, but you're not going to find them in your search, because this empowerment of you in your search is an empowerment of your ignorance, of what it's going to turn what you don't know that's out there for you to investigate against you. And that is one of the cleverest, darker sides of the Aquarian age, which I've been writing about since 1990, that we also have to, in the embrace of the new age, embrace this concept of the powers that be would like to control the mind in a mass-minded way and stop the uniquely individual mass movement of all of us individuals, not a crowd, but a grouping of like unique minded and hearted individuals living our lives according to our freedom and our equal responsibility. That's why it roars. It roars because it roars, it cries rebellion, it cries revolution, it cries, and in that process, it can also, one has to be aware of the dangers that one extreme, as often happens in revolutions, because up to this point, revolution in our world has really been what I would call react illusion. Certain illusions have been imposed upon us by our conditioning, and we rebel against it by only replacing them with new illusions. So, and that's why revolutions usually fail. But what is needed now, and this is the first decade of travail to bring this forth. And I mean travail not in a bad way, any more than I mean that the pain that a mother suffers when the contractions begin. It can be a terrible pain, but do not lose sight of what this new decade in its travails is presenting to you. It's just like a mother does not lose sight of, no matter how the waves of pain of bringing in the child, that this pain is momentary, decadal, and it will then produce a new birth of ourselves. And that is the roar of the mother travail. It is the roar of dozens of peoples in dozens of nations on dozens of streets right now that are beginning to rebel against the system that lets 10% of the people on the planet control most of the wealth and not let it be a current, but a stagnant pond of hoarded money or hoarded digital money, so that it is not flowing to invest. In fact, the powers have lost their minds so completely that they have taken away what the most important element of what makes investment valuable: time. The situation is that if you are loaned money, there's interest put on the time that you have it to pay it back and bring back a profit for the risk of whatever's invested in. Without that, nothing is constructed. Now the system is in a spiral, the banks now, of a steel fourth turning of the QE system. QE4 is on. It has been on since August. It's hidden because people are afraid if they made it public, it would bring the recession now. And the problem is what they've done is they've hid it in the repo bank nightly system, where they're funneling hundreds of billions of dollars rather than in higher rates to literally pump a QE4 into the system of fiat, funny, made up money. And it's there because it's shoring up a number of major banks that are insolvent. And we don't even know for sure which ones they are. And you go ahead.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that real quick. Thank you for bringing that up, because recently there was an article that came out in Germany. They, if they want to purchase gold anonymously, they used to, 2 years ago, they could only purchase 15,000 euros worth of gold at once. And you might say, well, that's a lot, right? But to limit the amount of gold, and no, that's not a lot in gold. It might be a lot of money, but it's not a lot in gold. But here's what's weird, John. Just recently, this year, guess how much gold they can get anonymously now in Germany, the max amount? Do you know what it is?
Not the exact number, but
2,000. It's 2,000. So it's gone from 15,000 to 2,000 in 2 years. Now, the Deutsche Bank is a German-based bank, is it not?
Yes.
There's some opportunities there. I'm just saying it's not looking too good for them. What if, I'm just thinking to myself, why would they limit it to that amount? What are your thoughts? And the Deutsche Bank as well.
Deutsche Bank is the linchpin of the economic EU system. And there's other things that are going on. Where Deutsche Bank goes, the euro is just a Deutschmark made up with the lipstick of the colors of the European Union as a euro. And this is the key thing that's going to happen in 2020. Very key. A number of very good, accurate sources of mine, Calente, Max Kaiser, and others, who have often been accurate about this. According to the astrology that I'm seeing that backs it up, Germany is going to turn Europe eastward, because the way they get out of this crushing system is to be the Bank of Europe that's saying, okay, the Americans have lost their mind. They're going into a space where the NATO alliance could very well break up in the next year or two. And there's inroads from major moves that Turkey has now become a hub of the belt and highway system that the Chinese are building, an infrastructure system that literally unites the greatest continent on the planet, which also includes Africa. Eurasia and Africa are actually connected, except for a little ditch of water called the Suez Canal that disconnected them, just a cosmetic border. And what is going to happen is the whole idea is that there's a huge shift that hasn't been seen since Europe has dominated history for 500-600 years. It's now the shift is going to Eurasia, Africa. And in that is Germany is already recognizing that this is where Europe's future is, and where Germany goes, where Germany's Deutschmark goes, Europe will follow. That is why the Nord Stream will be completed. That is why Vladimir Putin actually finished an agreement that is a solid truce that is establishing at last the things that he did in the Normandy conference just recently, and again equally with the French and German leaders when they tried Minsk 1 and 2 to stop the civil war in Ukraine between Ukrainian ethnic Russians and Ukrainians. It's a huge breakthrough that no one will hear about. No one will also hear about how the immense amount of gold stockpiling in Russia and gold mining in Russia and China and India is ongoing. I've been talking about this since 2008. There is going to be a new currency system. There are going to be multiple. We're going back to a multipolar economic system. And in the process of that will be a slow collapse and failure. Well, not so slow, about a 3-year process of a complete collapse of the fiat system that floated the economy off the gold standard since 1971. And one of the main things to watch out for is that America, by weaponizing its dollar to an extent that's flagrant, not even subtle anymore. I mean, it's always been the main linchpin weapon of the American hegemonic economic system, is to manipulate countries through the US dollar. It is why Nixon put Saudi Arabian oil as the black gold standard on the US dollar in 1971. He immediately, when he floated the economy off gold, he immediately made a treaty with Saudi Arabia that they would only sell their oil, their black gold in US dollars. The petrodollar is the reserve valued currency of the US, but now things are unraveling with that. Now that the US is a net exporter of oil, they've basically changed the situation. It's kind of a, I used to talk about near the end, I'm one of the first writers in prophecy that saw the Cold War ending in the end of the 80s. I documented that prediction looking at Nostradamus's prophecies that pinpointed a great event happening in the Borstinus, which is the ancient name for the Ukraine, that would see the law of war, that is, all things shared amongst each other. That's his 16th century way of saying communism in that region would collapse. And looking at some of his datings on his quatrains, that was in 1989, and it did happen. The Cold War officially was over in 1989. And in the quatrain that described this, which was in the 2nd century volume of his prophecy book, Quatrain 89, if 2 stands for a month, February 1989 was the month that the Soviet forces declared defeat in Afghanistan and pulled out of Afghanistan. And it was shortly after that, in a few short years, that the Soviet Union, and see if this sounds familiar to a certain other hegemonic nation. Soviet Union at that time had the second bloc. It had a vast military industrial complex, hundreds of bases all across what it was the communist second world. The first world being the so-called land of the free, and the American Western views capitalism, Marxist-Leninist socialism, Confucian communism, China, and the Eastern Bloc of the Warsaw Pact was all this very large part of the world that was controlled by this huge Soviet industrial complex. And in that time, in 1989, the Soviet people were, when they were taxed, 57% of all of their earnings per year was going just to keep the military going. Their infrastructure was crumbling. Their jobs were being hollowed out. The system was collapsing to keep this huge hegemonic military going. And it didn't take a big war to take it down. It took little Afghanistan, as small as a feather, hitting the back of the camel, the Soviet hegemonic military, and breaking it. And suddenly, they could not afford it. It economically imploded. And in that process also, which is important for our times, it didn't just implode. When Gorbachev was naive enough to think he could reform the system, it was literally like he took the lock off the door and everybody wanted to rush out of that debunked system. You will see this similar things. You see all, if you're hearing this, there's a lot of parallels here. Some of you are already thinking, and correctly, Americans are now paying 57% into the military industrial complex of our 1,000 bases scattered across the world to keep control and hegemonic power of the US dollar over the world, which is being abandoned. Just like people started abandoning when the Warsaw Pact realized that there was going to be reforms, they immediately broke up. People started to climb over the Berlin Wall and get out of Dodge. This situation, though it's rhyming to what happened in the Soviet Union, is literally a situation where the US, the acronym for the United States, is desperately trying to put an SR on that acronym. The US is becoming the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And the other thing too, just like the Communist Politburo in Moscow, the banking system in this so-called free market is controlling prices of gold, controlling and suppressing new economic systems like Bitcoin. It is controlling the finances and costs in the central bank. People are afraid about socialism coming. It's already here. It's a very Soviet system now. And this is exactly, go ahead.
Elaborate on that. And let me just say something before you do, please, because it seems to me that if you were to compare it to the Soviet system, we can still go out to, and we have a choice to spend lots of money on crap, or we have a choice to spend even more money on stuff that isn't quite as crappy, right? Yeah. So grocery store, there's all sorts of, you pay more for less chemicals in food. For less ingredients, as an example.
Yeah.
And that's when so what I'm saying is, where I'm going at with this is, when you say Soviet system, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. It seems like we still have a lot of freedoms. We get paid. Some of us, if you're in sales, you get paid commission. So if you're working a factory job, then that's more of a Soviet system because you're working your tail off and you're getting paid an hourly rate, which isn't enough anyway, probably, most likely, to live a fun life in today's world. But what do you think about that? So what do you mean?
Yeah. Like I said, it's a rhyme. History doesn't repeat itself, as Mark Twain sagely said, but it does rhyme. And the rhyme is not exactly the same. And it is, it's like the Soviet system followed a certain controlled Saturnian kind of quality that is not in the nature of America and Americans to be. So they will not exactly repeat that, but they will kind of, in the name of capitalism, in the name of free enterprise, they will develop the same class of oligarchs. I mean, we have major oligarchs right now controlling. There's Jeff B. There's Mr. Zeberg. There's Mr. Michael B., the New York mayor. There's who may very well be one of the two oligarchs that you have to choose from, that and Mr. T from New York. They're all, and that's because Saturn, this is a good time astrologically to explain what is coming in 3 steps in the first half of the 2020s. 3 steps of rebellion against the ancient 2,000-year Piscean corporate system. Corporate religion, corporate politics, it has reached its peak. This is because of the grand Pluto cycle. That's a 250-year cycle when Pluto goes back into Capricorn. The last time it did that, the American Revolution at the very end of the transit began. And in the following years, that was in 1776, but most of the revolution really took off and did its changing when Pluto moved into Aquarius. That's an important point to remember, folks, because Pluto is about to do the same thing. So the revolutions are constructed as a vision, as a contract, as an architectural plan under Pluto in Capricorn. Once that is clearly declared, like the Declaration of Independence, then the sleeves go up, the guns are grabbed, and people go to make it so. and fight the forces that would suppress it from ever coming. Thus, you got the first of the Aquarian, Pluto in Aquarius revolutions that followed after that, which is the American Revolution. And then after that, the very key to the rest of Eurasia, the French Revolution. And so that is setting up to rhyme again 250 years later. It is set up to rhyme in a way that we now have Saturn in Capricorn, the establishment, Pluto in Capricorn, the establishment. This is the way it is. This is the order. Deal with it or don't. And you also, in all of that, currently have Uranus in Taurus. Uranus is in its fall in Taurus. It's the very opposite place for it because it is squared its own home sign, Aquarius, revolution. So conformity, so unique ideas, not wanting to be chained up in an ordered, not your order, but a small group of people dictating over you their order, their laws of economy, their laws of nation, their laws of globalism. You're like a prisoner inside an uncomfortable place that wants to break out. But as long as you're in your fall, Uranus, the god of chaos and spontaneous change and new insights and new ways to look at things, you're going to struggle and be pretty much suppressed, especially if these other outer planets that define our kind of the stage in which we play our play here on planet Earth, in their transit of Capricorn is got a lot of strength to keep you down. So that's why you see people demonstrating in the streets from Peru to Argentina to so many. It's like a couple dozen, Hong Kong, other places, and some of these are even rebellions that are a device to suppress free thinking, like what happened in Bolivia. That was a coup d'etat. This man was making the mostly 90% Indian population of Bolivia, bringing 60% of the people out of poverty. And so the generals that told him or invited him to leave or else are the same generals that have been trained in Washington to overthrow liberal or socialist leaning governments in South America. So that has now brought riots of all the indigenous people, which are the vast majority of Bolivia, who are considered kind of subhuman by the Creole Spanish heritage people who want to run Bolivia. And this man, Evo Morales, was one of their own, a native South American. And so there was a lot of racial overtones to that. So that's happening. The other thing that's happening is you have the suppression of Venezuela, the attempt to overthrow that. That has not succeeded, where it's succeeded in Bolivia. It's funny how the mainstream news, I'll just give you a moment. So funny how the mainstream news does not want to talk too much about the successful overthrow because of the junta quality of it backed on American experiences. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's interesting you said that because I brought up Venezuela just in the previous podcast that I did. There's a TV series out called Jack Ryan on Amazon, and it's actually a good series. However, I knew right away the first episode when I watched it when Jack Ryan was up on the whiteboard and there was a class that was being given for alphabet agency people and special forces and clandestine ops at the CIA headquarters or somewhere around there. I think it was Langley or something like that. But regardless, they were and they're like, the guy's like, okay, so who's the biggest threat in the world? And they're raising their hands and they're like, it's China, it's the Soviet Union, it's Russia, it's and then Jack Ryan goes, well, what if I told you you were all wrong? What if I told you it was Venezuela? And here's why. Because and then he was going on and saying the proximity and that they could go buy a nuke and they had, but what he said, one of the first things he said was, I was like, yeah, they're telling us right there. He's like, they have all these oil resources. Yeah. And I'm like, Oh no, that has nothing to do with them being a threat. But in this series, John, in this series, they have specifically that, like they get in, they infiltrate into the, and have the coup d'etat in the system, and it's like, are they showing us what they're planning on doing?
Well, yeah, they are. And also, what Ryan fictionally is doing is what happens in the CIA and the NSA. He is indoctrinating the people to think they are the threat.
Because they love it's because they love us so much, though. It's because they
Oh
care
yeah,
about
they love our freedom. So we put sanctions upon them, which has so far killed 40,000 people in Venezuela. And with my sources that are in Venezuela showing me live footage and things, the country is not going crazy. People have food. It's tough. But what's happened is a lot of thousands of people with dialysis, thousands of people that we are denying. We want to befriend these people, and we're withholding medicine from them, ways to keep them healthy. And those folks, we may be trained not to think that they think too deep about this, but if you actually talk to these people in these different sanctioned countries, in Iran and other places, they are some of them very ancient cultures, very sophisticated. They may not have all the stuff that we have and all the entertainment distractions that we have and the crap that we can buy opposed to this crap over there. But these cultures get it. They see what this is. And we have actually united Venezuelans with the Maduro government. They've learned from that, though, because Bolivia went down fast. Because and the press doesn't want to talk about that, because that is a classic repeat of Chile. What did Nixon say when there was a liberal with socialist tendencies that took over Allende in 1973 in Chile? He wrote in his notes, "Make the Chilean economy scream." And guess who he had help him? The man who has been entrusted to do the same to Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, the man responsible for training the Contras and the death squads in Guatemala, the man and also El Salvador during the 80s, 70s and 80s, or especially the 80s. And perhaps responsible for the deaths of 350,000 Central Americans. They remember him in Nicaragua. They remember him in Salvador. They remember him in Chile. We are trained to forget him. And that is what's so dangerous about our times, the most dangerous thing that's happening. And it kind of equates to the danger that is a close potential now in the first 3 years. I'll get back to the pillars, but I want to interject into this challenging thing, not to frighten people, but to wake you up to the situation, because a lot of the prophecies that I put together in the book, A New Cold War, which is available on Amazon back in 2014, when this new Cold War started to develop, a lot of the people that were predicting the First and Second World War to such breathtaking accuracy, sometimes 700 years ago, to during the time of Nostradamus' time, and a couple of contemporaries, and some people in modern time like Edgar Casey, who accurately dated when the war would start, when America would get in, when the war would end. But dating is a very, very hard thing to accomplish. Casey was one of the best at doing that, and his work is documented, date tagged, and filed away. Anyway, the main danger about World War III is that one of these prophets, Matthias Stormberger, who made this vision in the late 1780s, around the time of the French Revolution in Bavaria, was saying, with open eyes will the people of the world step into these catastrophes. And it's funny because he said it in the plural. He was talking about the Third World War, but something more. So he's talking about two things. What are the two things that are potentially the most dangerous to the future of human life and life on this planet? Then two catastrophes that, though people are good news is, are starting to awaken to the danger. But the vast majority, especially of the people who are actually the ones who are predicted to trigger it, us, over issues in the Middle East for one of these issues, and the other trigger is so these two things, these two dangers, these two catastrophes that he's talking about, the same that Nostradamus talks about during the time of the third and final Antichrist, which is alive in our times. It's probably one of the leaders in the Middle East, most likely the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, because his acronym NBS is a classic Nostradamus trick for taking out the vowels of words to hide them in code. MBS without its missing A and U is Mobus. Mobus is the code name for the third and final Antichrist. An Arab prince, he calls him. A young, dark man of evil doing. Mohammed bin Salman has become the de facto king of Saudi Arabia behind his diseased and sickened father. And he is basically did this at 34. It's pretty young to be the head honcho of Saudi Arabia at that age. And he's a dark bearded man of evil doing. He's literally wiping out people in Yemen. The biggest war that's going on the planet since 2012, or no, 2015, that almost nobody in the West ever talks about. That's literally murdering an entire race of people. And Saudi Arabia is doing it with US weapons, British weapons, US Special Forces, helping to target the weapons, and around the clock fueling of US Air Force tankers in the air, fueling the Saudi Arabian Royal Air Force. They're using cluster bombs, they're using phosphorus, and all of it's got made in USA, even these illegal weapons of the United Nations. So the thing is, with open eyes, the two catastrophes that I see are a third world war that could suddenly happen, even now, any moment, that people are not being aware of because they're not getting the information. The information is being propagated and filtered. The corporations one of them big ones being Saudi Arabia, has a lot of influence on Fox and CNN. Raytheon and Grumman also have lots of advertisement money they put in there. And when I'd see these ads on these networks, I would say, why is Raytheon promoting its planes when nobody watching this could even buy a ticket to watch one of these planes take off? So what's the point? What's the act here? What's the propaganda here? Well, Raytheon, a lot of these major systems, and by the way, the same people who happen to help a certain face planting organization deplatform people, the committee that does that is the Atlantic Council. The Atlantic Council is consisting of former CIA and NSA heads, Grumman, Raytheon, the military wing of Boeing, and the generals and politicians running NATO, and a few other intelligence organizations. These are, at the very least, pro-war, pro-hegemonic, and if they're the board of censors of certain privatized public access grounds, then guess what? They're going to make sure. This is why I'm speaking so cryptically I'm speaking Nostradamus as much as I can on this show, because we are entering a period, because people are beginning to awaken, that the powers that be are going to try to suppress this. And, you know, the corporate form of fascism, which I've been seeing coming to the 2020s for 30 years now it's here. I wish I had been wrong about that, but it is here now. And rather than being afraid, and rather than feeling helpless that we are literally walking into the danger of two things, not just war, World War III that comes on us completely by surprise, because our press is bought off and not our mainstream, not the alternative media. That's where a lot of the good journalists are going, because they're literally being crowded out of the corporate media, which is now dying and losing its ability. And it's one of the reasons why you see me on this show a lot more than you see me on CNN, MSNBC, or debating Sean Hannity on Fox, like I did in the past.
Well, here's the thing, though. I do need to bring something up. I was told that Glenn Beck is much better at using a whiteboard than I am. So I did take some notes. I'm just a beginner, folks, with the whiteboard, but when I really put my mind to it. But I want to talk about something. You brought up the media, right?
Yeah.
And I've read several articles recently and looked at the statistics on the local news and newspapers. And it seems to be like the next Blockbuster almost. So when I say Blockbuster, I'm referring to the business Blockbuster. That I think there might be one Blockbuster left somewhere out there in Alaska. I don't know if it's still there or not. So the local news and newspapers and paying for news is really, because it's changing, it's transitioning. So we need to be careful with keeping track of alternative forms of media. Like if you enjoy Leak Project, you need to make sure that you go to the website on a regular basis, because a lot of times, for whatever reason, gremlins will actually eat a subscription. Gremlins will eat something on the bell so people won't get a notification. Nice. So make sure that you go to Leak Project every day. Make sure you go to HogueProphecy.com every day. So that way you will, because those are the platforms, the main platforms, and there's a lot of exclusive content. I've got exclusive videos. I've got several videos with John that are exclusive at LeakProject.com, and a lot of stuff we talk about, it needs to stay exclusive at the LeakProject.com, because there's so many snowflakes out there that melt, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen, because we love the snowflakes, and we love everybody. So, but it's weird to see this transition, John, about the news and the local news, and now, if you know where to go, you can get great information. You just have to know where to go. 10 years ago, you would look something up. The algos were designed to show you what you were looking for. Yep. Now, there's parameters that it has to meet, and then it'll show you something that you might or might not want to see, kind of, but it's not really. It used to be such a beautiful system. It was it was brilliant. That's why it got so successful so quick, is because it's what people wanted. And we'll leave it at that. Please continue, John. You're amazing.
I estimate, and I think I actually might, even though it's a risk that I might actually stumble on somebody who did actually unsubscribe to Hogue Prophecy over the last several years. But my estimate is that I have had those little gremlins munch away and take people off that wanted to be watching me by 10,000 people just in the last few years. And so I'm probably going to reach out and send an email with saying, it's the only time I'm going to send this email. And if you actually unsubscribe, I apologize for invading your space. But for the sake of the fact that the majority of people that have shown it unsubscribe might actually be people who went, wow, I was getting Hogue Prophecy, Hogue Bulletin journals, and I guess he's a flake, because now I'm not getting them anymore. And I've tested this and looked at this, and I'm finding that this is happening. It's happening to Lee Camp of Redacted Tonight. It's happening to Truth Dig, everywhere. Consortium News, you name it. Chris Hedges, other really good people. This is the way in which, insidiously, which is very Aquarian atmospheric. The dark side of the Aquarius is not so obvious. It's very kind of subtle on the air waves, on the wireless, on the Wi-Fi. People are just quietly deplatformed. And there's even people that are thinking that they're sending to their thousands of friends on Twitter, and they're not going anywhere. They even get as tricky as to make it look like you're actually reaching your people when you're not. That's why it is important to find as many links and ways to access those news organizations, RSS feeds, clunky old technology as well as the new stuff. In fact, some of the older ways they're overlooking. So like I get an RSS announcement on email or things like that. And yes, it's a real struggle, but it's also a sign. It's a sign that they're scared. It's a sign that the beginning of the shift is happening, which now I want to bring back. I just want to close on the last bit about saying that the two catastrophes I think Stormberger is talking about is, of course, the danger of World War III suddenly erupting because of a complete programmed propagandistic news that is not telling you who the boogeyman is. It may not be Vladimir Putin. It may be Washington and the military-industrial complex that needs a new business model to keep a decades-long Cold War going, to make the same $9 to $11 trillion of your tax money from the last Cold War into their pockets, keeping and sustaining the biggest socialist organism that's ever seen by the earth, the military-industrial complex and the Pentagon budget. And so that is the one thing that could stumble into, by a miscalculation, into a sudden nuclear war. The other danger, of course, is whatever one wants to theorize about why it's happening, it is definitely happening, that the climate is getting disrupted to the point that there's a lot of extinction level events that are happening to species all around the planet. And it is also something that the powers that be would prefer you don't concern yourself with. But here's the thing, and it's going to happen with the Generation Z and the millennials and pretty much any generation that's younger than a baby boomer like me. It's not just a generation gap. It is literally a generation rebellion. The younger generations are now beginning to have political power in the 2020s. And this is part of the three pillars I want to talk about astrologically, the three steps in which the younger generations, who have most of their potential future before them, are looking at this system that keeps them down, that keeps them indentured servants for their college, that keeps them really unable to have the kind of growth and happiness that people had in their GDPs in my generation. The beauty of this in the spiritual sense is when times like this happen and blow away dreams, like the American dream, it brings people into a confrontation with their inner reality. And that is actually a good thing. That's when real change that can be better for the world happens. A lot of people had their head in the sand about Hitler and Mussolini and the Imperial Japanese and their fascist takeover attempt of planet Earth. And it could have been stopped a decade before it happened, but it wasn't. So it is a part of human life and reality that we have to actually have the doo-doo hit the fan, the smoke becoming fire in the house that we dwell in before we get to work and drop things that were so identified and so part of what we thought was important in our lives. But when faced with the danger of an unexpected war and an unexpected climate catastrophe that we're running out of time to deal with, without a lot of people not making it through it, we have to we have to confront those things, and so in a way, the shock of them taking our dreams away temporarily is a good thing. Because if everything's really nice, you're never, as Gurdjieff used to say, people during the time of World War II and his system, and I will end on this business, Rex, is that so you can say something. The system, people used to go to him and say, you try to create your harmonious development of man first in St. Petersburg, then World War I happened, and you lost all your disciples in the trenches. You tried a few years later to start up in Moscow. The Russian Revolution happened. You got out of the Russian Revolution, Civil War, got your people that were left into Georgia and Tbilisi. It was really getting good. Then the Red Army came in and took that. And then you got finally to France. And then the Germans came and occupied France. And isn't that been stopping your work every step of the way? And he said, no, you misunderstand my work. The challenge of the harmonious development of man and women can only happen in such times when their dreams that keep them sleepy and people of great potential of consciousness will not move in to ask, what's this all for? Is there's a whole other way to look at this? And then pursue that truth. That does not happen on honey, sweet, golden times. It happens in times like we're about to enter. So as me, as a person who seeks the truth about myself and others, there is actually a blessing in the upheaval that's coming, a birth of a new understanding. But I'll let you say what you were about to say before I go into the three pillars.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one of the things that I like about talking to you, John, is we can have a conversation, and if I don't agree on something, I can bring it up and we can talk about it. Yeah. The climate change that you're bringing up, when you said, and I might have misheard it or misunderstood it, you said that they don't want us to know about this climate change that could create catastrophic doom, essentially. And is that what you said, basically?
Yeah, I mean, especially in the United States, it's not so true around the world. The problem, I just interjected, the problem around the world is that people are very disorganized and not very smart about how to fix this problem because it actually hasn't reached the level in which the entire human race will be alarmed. That's coming by the middle of this new decade. So that. But it's mostly America, which is one of the greatest polluters.
Well, let me jump in on that because as far as the pollution goes, certainly there are areas that, in big cities that you can go into that the pollution it's horrible. The inversion in Salt Lake City is an example. I spent years in Salt Lake City, and 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the inversion in Salt Lake City, the amount of pollution in Salt Lake City wasn't nearly as bad. It wasn't good, but it wasn't nearly like it is today. In places in China and around the world, it's really bad. However, with that said, the official story, the narrative, I actually think it's the opposite. I think that they're using cyclical events that are more connected with the sun, and where our Earth is in connection with the sun and the weakening of the magnetosphere. I think they're actually using these events as an excuse to create more control, to say you need to pay more for this infrastructure that we're going to build. You need to go to electric now. If you notice, most of the cars are going to electric, which is great. That's wonderful. But is it really going to save the world? The CO2 that they're saying is the problem. The trillions of dollars that they want to put into that is not going to fix the problem of CO2. And here's the thing, CO2 isn't the problem anyway. You go back 55 million years and there's ice core data that showed the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere was more than double what it is now. So how in the world did that happen? CO2 is actually good for plants. So with the 400 to 500 parts per million that we're dealing with right now, that they're saying, oh, it's your fault. It's your fault. You need to change your lifestyle, when they're the ones holding the patents. They're the ones holding the technologies. They're the ones that own these giant conglomerate, multinational corporations, and they're trying to change us. And I think you're totally wrong, man, about, at least especially in the Northwest. You talk to people in the Northwest and they think that Greta is like the most, and hey, man, bless her heart. I think she's amazing. I've never listened to her talk, but she probably thinks she's doing the right thing. And you know what? Hey, if she's trying to say, hey, the world needs to change because we're destroying the environment, that's great. But is she being used by people above her as the mouthpiece, as the essential spokesperson? Because you can't talk bad about somebody that's not even an adult. I mean, you're like, and then people do it. And they're like, oh, well, guess what? Well, this person said this about Greta. Can you believe they would do that? I mean, it's kind of like a trigger move, in my opinion, to get people to react a certain way. The amount of CO2 that's emitted from termites, the amount of CO2 that's emitted from soil and bugs and everything else, it's insignificant, these protocols that they're attempting to change the world. Now, having nuclear reactors next to fault lines, having nuclear reactors next to the ocean, having coal plants around the world, is that a good idea? Probably not. There's probably much better alternatives. But do you think that they're really using the rights? I mean, do you really think that it's our fault, your fault, my fault? People that are
no, it's not about fault, and that is the whole woke movement. Right now, the people that are, even though it's becoming more a public issue that people are discussing and reacting about, right now it's part of this whole. I mean, it's equally could very well be that certain aspects and certain little children who are having a meltdown, and may it be an honest one if I have listened to her, and I have a sense that there may be a billion Greta Thunbergs in about 5 years that are just as angry and perhaps just as unled. The problem is, here's the struggle. Here's the unique struggle of this new era. And I don't honestly know if we will, how we will sort this out, because we're in uncharted territory. What is happening behind all of this, behind those who are fighting, just kind of beating their chests in it's global warming, it's this and that, it's fault, all the things you're saying, and the people who are denying that it's happening and no, it's and all of that. The thing that's, as a prophecy person, that is always like, I'm going to share with you something that no one's even seeing yet. That if what I'm saying is true, you will be seeing more of this in the latter half of the 2020s. Is that what we have here is a struggle of a new core way of thinking in the next 20 centuries, where it's not about authorities over us, but it's not about sovereign nations controlling its people and going to war economically and militarily for dominance in the world. It's about individual sovereignty. The human race's future, if it has one, is about individual sovereignty, person-to-person interactions across the whole planet. And there's what I was saying earlier. What I consider what you're saying and all of its honest points and all what the other people are saying against what you're saying, I see it deep down in the root as a struggle to find sovereignty. But in the process, a lot of it's about making people wrong and getting into that whole wokish, you're all bad people. These people are the deplorables. These people are the this, that. And a lot of the powers that be, whether they identify politically, like the idiotic Paris Climate Accords, which is an absolute joke. And I'm the climate change guy saying that.
Thank you for talking about
absolute idiocy. And so the politicians that have just made this problem, whatever it is, conveniently go away without any legal binding agreements to anyone, just kind of peer pressure. Whether one agrees with it or not, imagine if there was only peer pressure in the alliance of the English, the Americans, and the Soviet Union to defeat Hitler. I think Hitler would be conquering Washington by 1944. I mean, so what I'm saying is this is like a cake that hasn't been battered, that hasn't been quite cooked yet. What is going on? That my answer to your statements, and thank you for laying those out clearly, is that this cake was not going to be baked to its critical mass where either side of this is really going to take a look at it until whatever's going down is literally a alarm to our future as an existing people on the planet. And in prophecy, I for one thing, everything you said, Rex, I'm with you 100%. I want exactly what you're saying to be so. But since 1973, long before Greta was even the twinkle in her mother and father's eye, and long before it was really noticeable, I had an epiphany in my prophetic sense that this thing was coming. And now, almost 47 years later, it's here. And now we'll see how it really hatches out. In prophecy, I can only state things that are ahead of us that are hard to imagine. For instance, that Michael B. of New York could actually be the only person who can take T out of his job in November. And people go, why? That guy's as charismatic as chopped liver. He is. And he's old. If he becomes president, he will actually be inaugurated just around his 79th year. So and just like Mr. T, when I was talking about him 13 months before his upset victory of HC in 2016, he was a joke in the summer of 2015. They thought it was just a promotion for, in fact, NBC signed him for a new season of his show. And he was saying, oh, no, I really mean it. I want to run this time. My kids can run the business now. They're ready. Now I can do this, when they weren't 4 years ago. Yes, Mr. T, we know your joke. We know what you do. And he just shrugged and went off. And then I started looking at astrology. And within 5 minutes of looking at astrology, I had an epiphany. I said, my God, Mr. T is serious. And Mr. T is the only man who can defeat Miss HC in 2016. And he did. Now I'm having a similar weird epiphany moment with Michael B. of NYC. That you say, and how can he be a real contender? Well, first, just like Mr. T, in the next 11 or 8 months, I'm going to be describing in Hogue Prophecy all the challenges, the hurdles that Mr. Mike has to get over, just like Trump had all these hurdles, which he fulfilled. He completed all the way to election night. The problem this time is that Michael, little Mikey of New York, is not the friend of the networks that are become propaganda organs for those who are blue about the situation that happened in 2016, opposed to those who are red in favor, flushed in favor of repeating Mr. T's term. So these people are, so if the press does not give Mikey the amount of free advertising that they gave Mr. T for ratings, then it's very likely that he won't make it. But I tell you, he is the only one who can astrologically, because if he's in there, his astrology, being that he's Aquarius, it is actually in harmony, like a certain president named FDR, who's an Aquarian, during the last time we were in this kind of potential planetary WW World War emergency. And so just with that said, the interesting thing will be, has the American people been, and I'll get to in a moment with this, it's finishing off before I'll have you talk, and then I'll really get into the three pillars, is that this propagandizing, filtering the mainstream news, which a majority of people are still watching and blindly believing into, even though there's good, hopeful movement of intelligent people are draining like crazy and will continue into the next decade into alternative media, which is now the new media. It'll really be a test to see how deeply propagandized and brain dirtied. Brainwashing to me is a very good thing. Is a clean brain is a perceptive brain. A brain full of crap that's being poured into it by an overly entertained, overly stimulated, rote-driven news service is making tribalism so bad that I even wonder if the American people, without a huge shock that is coming, the shock's coming, I wonder if they could even accept the fact that this guy is stability. I'm not supporting him. I will not vote for Mikey from New York, but that this oligarch is actually going to play the pitch that I'm the adult in the room. I really do get things done. I have a record to prove it, whether you like it or not, folks. And I'm wondering how tired you're all getting at all this polarized red on blue versus red looking a whole lot more like blue versus gray in 1861. So that's the last hurdle that he has to cross. And now over to you, Mr. Rex.
I'm laughing so hard right now because it's amazing how we have to use these certain terms, right? And
welcome when you're saying, to our world.
I love it. It's great, and people are catching on real quick. And one of the moderators from Australia said, "Mr. T's running." Oh my goodness, I had no idea. And then somebody else said, "I pity the fool," and I just lost it. That was it's so brilliant, man. It is so brilliant. Okay, so. What I was going to say something, and do I even remember what I was going to say now?
I was starting to forget my thread a few times there. So much going on.
Oh yeah, thank you. Now I remember. So yeah. That was the funniest thing I've heard all day. That was beautiful, brilliant. So I've got a friend named John D'Souza, and John D'Souza is a retired FBI investigator, 25 years, very cool guy. And we were talking about the upcoming polls of ticks, that's coming up, and he actually brought some very good information to the table about different possibilities based upon his research and investigation tactics. And I've got the exclusive at leakproject.com. So folks, you need to go listen to this in full at leakproject.com. Just type in John. It's actually one of the first ones that come up if you go to the homepage, but John D'Souza, leakproject.com. And he said that he believes Michelle will actually be the candidate, and that Mr. B is going to drop out, back her, and on top of that, there was a wonderful lady that was, well, I don't know who she is, but I never watched her, but there was a lady that dropped out of color, and she was actually doing good in the race, so that, they don't understand why she dropped out. Maybe Michelle, being of color, will be the candidate and the only candidate, with all those parameters. And that's what he thinks. And he said, hey, you should go look at the odds in Vegas. He says, I'm not one to gamble. I would never, but you can go to Vegas and the odds out there are pretty good. So I'm actually thinking maybe I'll go to Vegas. What do you think about that?
Well, I tell you, here's the code for what happened to the gal from Cal. That was the designated HC replacement. I will use the Nostradamus anagram for the person who exposed her, the person of hula hoops. Name, I'll call her Tulsa, Oklahoma. and she's also the person in Miss Tulsa, Oklahoma, who voted present for the impeachment. Yeah, for the imps who wanted peaches to go their way with very little bipartisan help.
I'm peachy.
Yeah. So things may not go very peachy in January. And frankly, because the peach was not delivered to the higher house, it officially has not happened yet to Mr. T. That, according to the Constitution, the peach has to be delivered to the higher house from the lower house where the imps wanted to take it, so that the other higher imps of the higher house can have a trial and see and taste the peach and see if it's evidentiary to its taste being true. So the stars are not favoring that, with the conjunction of Jupiter, of Saturn and Pluto this month in Capricorn. It actually supports the establishment of the imps in power. So, and it will further hurt the imps who seek to be praised for their peach. They'll get kicked in the peach, unfortunately, and pull actionably. And the thing about the Misses of B running to yet to be seen is that she will have to deal with the return of Miss Havisham. Now, those of you who've read your Charles Dickens, I will tell you a tale of Miss Havisham. She was the bride, the heir apparent. She was going to be married on 8th November 2016, but the preordained marriage with the people did not happen, and she lost her shoe, and she only now has lived in limbo since that time, watching the cobwebs grow in her mansion, with only one shoe on her foot, says Charles Dickens. And she has literally stopped her life awaiting for that election to be repeated, that marriage to happen in this year, in a new November. And she is so deeply grooved into this that it's very likely that she will muddle the crowd, whether Mrs. B enters or not, into the situation and actually join. Now, all of this will have to happen in the next few weeks in the month, because the official primary for all the primates who are into peaches, all the imps, starts on early February in Iowa. And then it goes to New Hampshire, and then it goes round and around we go. Where the rigged system stops, who knows? Except that there are certain supermen and women who are waiting in a convention in July for a second vote, when no one is clearly elected, who will enter by the thousands in to choose the person that's left standing that is most appreciable to their elitist feelings. And that is why it is going to be so difficult to defeat Mr. T. It's not because Mr. T is a great orator or a great convincer, although he has his moments of visceral honesty that won over an entire group of people who wanted to go to college to elect him. And so it's not because he is great at what he does, but he is a perfect mirror reflecting back whatever's thrown at him. I mean, this is true in his human design as well as in his astrological makeup. Mr. T, when attacked, has this amazing, unique power of mirroring exactly the attack back on the attacker. And attacking him is not the way to defeat him. The imps of the peaches have not learned that lesson. And so it's more than likely, unless the economy goes into tailspin in September rather than a few weeks after the election, the marriage, then we'll have to see. Now, with that said, now I can engage upon how there are three major steps astrologically that shows the 20 centuries of the Piscean age centralization and state dictating to the individual, how that will slowly become unglued. And for better and worse, the people will rise, and in their rising many will fall into the trouble of just being a herd going into another extreme, just like what happened in the 30s and 20s when this situation was similar, where there was too much wealth in a small group of people and the rest of the world was poor in Europe and other places. Extremist revolutions happened across Russia, across Germany, across places that created social movements that were isms that people didn't like, who had money and power, and capital had influence, because that's what capital means. It means head. It's an economy that's made up by the head, rather than an economy that shares its social wealth in an ism that they don't like. So the first thing, that's the first step of this, the first pillar ends at the end of 2020 when Saturn leaves Capricorn. That is the beginning of the turning of the tide. It is as significant as the last time Saturn left an Earth sign back in 1942, which was out of Taurus. When it did that, it basically, that the moment in May 42, when that happened, within 2 weeks, the Battle of Midway destroyed the Japanese core carrier fleets. And that was the turning of the tide of the Pacific theater of World War II. It took years to finally defeat them, but that was the end of the ability of the Japanese to threaten and defeat the United States in the Battle of Midway, off the coast of Hawaii and Midway, in the center of the Pacific. At the very same time in May 42, the German 6th Army and the 4th Panzer Army were marching happily into Stalingrad, thinking they would take Stalin City in a few weeks and everything would be over. 5 months later, those two armies never came out of Stalingrad, and the tide on the German European theater of World War II turned. The situation at the end of this new year, December 18th, is when it turns, and in that period and a few months after, the first shock to the authoritarian systems is going to be with the economy. They will try to save it. The IMF will try to shore up the country banks, central banks of the world, but rather than keep the thing going with 44 trillion fake bits of money or something, there's a certain money system they're creating that's an emergency fund. It's another kind of fiat. It will not, rather than give 11 years before the next crash, it gives only 11 months. And then by 2022, you will see a collapse of fiat system. And that will cause a lot of turmoil in the world, loosening things up in preparation to big tides changing, because that's when you'll see the reaction being the forces that want to control. And I'm talking about, and you've probably seen this, Rex, Max Kaiser just did a show for this New Year thing where he had a lot of the sources of some of the Lord Blakefein and Jamie Dimon and other major economic people that already are talking about the time of the pitchforks is coming. The time when the billionaires are going to be besieged, and they are seeing it coming, just as Hitler was also very sage in seeing things coming, but not sage enough to see how he stepped into it. So so that is coming after with Saturn's fall. And in the following 3 years, you will have the final 3 years of the long transit, generational transit of Pluto in Capricorn. And like I was saying earlier in the show, where that's where revolution, a new blueprint of revolution is experimented with in many ways, just like cryptocurrency and all, trying to find a new system. What will happen in 2024 when Pluto moves out is very interesting. It'll be another presidential election cycle. It will either be the end of the second term of Mr. T, or perhaps the beginning of Mike B's second term, although it's very likely at his age it'll have to be somebody else, because anybody who is going to pass through the next year of election this year, ending in the 0, is now a part of a certain cycle of a curse of an Indian warrior's death named Tecumseh, who his brother, who was the head of an Indian coalition in the 1813, was fighting General Harrison of the United States forces. The Indians were allied to the British in 1812 war, and this ended up with a defeat at Tippecanoe, where Tecumseh was killed. And when his brother, who was also a prophet, the leader of the group, political leader, heard of it, he made a curse saying Harrison will die. And after he dies, every chief of the white people, once in a generation, they will lose a chief. Harrison, later on, now an older man, in 1840, won in that election year ending in the 0. He won a seat as president. On his inauguration in February 1841, he made his inauguration speech in a driving rainstorm in Washington, his white head bare to the sky of driving cold rain, so that people could see him in all the bowlers and top hats speaking, and he caught pneumonia and died. So it would seem by chance or otherwise that prediction was made true. So what then happened is that 20 years later, Abraham Lincoln was elected, and he then also died in office, assassinated in his second term, early part of his second term. Then 20 years later, Garfield in 1880 was elected president, and in his first term was assassinated by an anarchist. 20 years later, McKinley in 1900, he also is made president. He is assassinated by an anarchist. 20 years later, William Harding dies of a heart attack while president. 20 years later, 1940, Franklin Delano Roosevelt does an unprecedented thing. He runs for a third term because he feels he is the only leader capable to deal with the war that will inevitably drag the United States into it. Even though it was a highly isolationist period for America, he was prescient enough to see that the war was coming. So what he did is he went for a third term and won. The war came. He was elected for a fourth term, and in that fourth term, in the first few months, he died of a brain aneurysm. So it shows that this curse of Tecumseh, you can still have more terms, but if you had one of them elected in a 0, at this point with the curse, it means you die in office. 20 years later, the one that a lot of us were alive to see, the older ones among us in this audience, 1960. President Kennedy's elected. He's assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. 20 years after that, in 1980, Ronald Reagan is elected. But here's the great change. An attempt of assassination happened, and he nearly died on the operating table, but he survived. And thus people started to wag and say, oh, well, this has just been an amazing string of chance. And what about, and maybe the curse is broken now, and what about that one guy, Zachary Taylor, who was elected president in 1850? He was elected in a year ending in a 0. Why? And he died of food poisoning, eating strawberries and cream on a hot day, and it was stale. Why isn't he part of the curse? Now I'll tell you why. Because what happens in all those other 20 years, zero election dates is happening again in 2020. It is the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. It is something that basically in more ancient people would never pick a president or a leader or a king at this time, more connected to the celestial motions of things. This is the year to meditate, to look inward, to atone, to remember, not to go forward with new leadership. But we are not connected to that. And therefore, this, whether the prophet brother, older brother of Tecumseh understood this or not, this is what's been paralleling all of these things. So the question is the curse broken by Reagan surviving? Let's see. What happens 20 years later is a political assassination. It is the assassination of Al Gore, who was denied victory in the popular vote and the Electoral College vote, mind you. I will get to explain why that happened. Because the Supreme Court.
No, man, it was the hanging chads, bro.
Yeah, well, I'm getting to the hanging. No, you know what?
I can't tell. I don't know. Well, is that not even a circle? That might not even be a circle, John. That looks like a rectangle. I mean, it might be a pyramid. It's not a chat, bro. It's a bomb.
But guess what, Billy Joe? Guess what happened? Y'all didn't see because the press moved on with the G.W. Bush administration. And y'all didn't see what happened. A bunch of scholars went and got a subpoena to count all those chads. And they took a heck of a long time to do it. Lots of sarsaparilla and some of them a little bit of bourbon and mint juleps, but they did it. They actually went through all those counties that didn't want to vote. When the one Republican leader said, well, why don't you count the whole state? And then they jumped on him and he never got on the press again. I was kind of surprised. But that seemed to be fair enough. The Democrats want to only recount the Democratic controlled places in Broward County and other places. But this is where it gets strange. When these people went through and counted everything, the actual missing votes, the chads that weren't counted carefully, were in all the Republican-controlled counties. No wonder they didn't want to count the whole state, because Al Gore would have won the election by 20,000 votes, not Bush by 540 some. And anyway, so that that's the thing that everybody went on and didn't talk about. But actually, the Supreme Court stopped the state Supreme Court from actually counting and there was nothing that would have been wrong for the president being a little delayed. It wasn't like there was nobody being president at that time. So the rush to stop that was because of that. And the one Republican that actually said, hey, let's count the whole, they were like, shh, shh, get down. And that's why. So basically what happened to the curse now is that it moved from an actual assassination attempt to something more subtle, a political assassination of a man who actually electorally, as well as popular vote, won the presidency of the United States. And look what happens after that to our democracy. We get in the president that was replacing him looked the other way when the door was unlocked, and here comes bin Laden and all his people taking the 911, creating a whole new war on terror, which leads to a phony reason to go into war in Iraq, which suddenly has the neoconservative movement, which I have in my book, Nostradamus, The War with Iran. I show the evolution of all of their manifestos, looking for a Pearl Harbor event that would advance. And they even said, although we are sympathetic politically with the GOP, we are ready to work with a Democrat like Bill Clinton or any other people to do any of this stuff. So they were open to any president who would be amendable to their worldview, like Mr. O.B. that preceded Mr. T in his latter term. So basically, the list that had all these countries lined up to be taken down and replaced in oil and resource-rich areas needed a Pearl Harbor event. And so that was instructed to Mr. GW in October of 2000. He had already a month earlier, in a real cram course to get his world global policy taught to him by all the key neoconservatives that were his teachers. He's asked a question in the first debate with Al Gore, and he's saying, do you have a plan for Iraq? Are you going to do what are you going to do about Iraq? And like Bush kind of winked and he kind of looked. And I saw him kind of going, oh, we have a plan for Iraq. And you just watch the show, you can see he's just bursting on out to tell what he knows. And it was a month before that Kagan and some other people wrote the essay about we need a Pearl Harbor event to advance our agenda, where people will be ready to rapidly follow us because of literally an attack on the United States, a surprise attack. So you had the who's who of all the neocons, and I list them in the book, who were in the cabinet of that president, who were not given one report in Texas in the lazy summertime about this imminent attack domestically on the nation by Al Qaeda. They were given 6 reports, and I have many of them in that book which have been since released, where it was, so they were at least 6 times told this thing was coming very accurately, and they did nothing. Suddenly we have a whole list of countries to be taken out. In fact, you even have Wesley Clark talking openly about how he went a week after to visit some of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which used to be his assistants when he was commander of NATO. And the one guy was saying, come in the office. Well, you're too busy. Said, no, I really need you to come into the office right now. And so he closed the door and said, I look at this. And it's a memo from upstairs, meaning Mr. Rummy of the Feld. And he's going, we're going to attack Iraq. And Wesley Clark said, was Iraq responsible for 9/11? The Joint Chief of Staff General said, no. Why then are we going in? He said, I don't know. Sometimes I think it's like we're just good at invading countries and destroying stuff. That's what the guy said, and they, they've had it in for Iraq and they're just going to take them down. So 2 weeks later, he comes back and he's got the same guy saying, come into my office. And he says, what's up? He says, it's worse now. And he's like, show him another memo he's not supposed to show him. He says, it's not just Iraq. We're going after 7 countries and ending up with Iran that have to go down in this war on terror. And this is classic neoconservative stuff because it's documented in the stuff they said before this. So anyway, that's all happening. So my point being here is that the 20 years that have happened between 2000 and 2020, I think the curse is not over. It's changed its focus. It's not about the loss of a chief in office. It's about the loss of the office. It's about a loss of our republic, our democracy, as the ultimate step of this. Now, with the fact that there are so many old candidates involved, it takes no Nostradamus to figure out the odds of the math that if one of these creaking people, Mr. T, would be in his mid-70s, Mr. Birdie, Colonel Sanders, it would be in his late 70s, as would Mr. BB Joe, and Michael B will be the oldest. So the possibility of a president being unfortunately dying of natural causes in the next term is a potential. That would get us back on the track of the old style, and that would change my view about this. It's just I'm putting out there that that's what I'm feeling. This is where it's going. That the republic that we've known is being taken away. It started 10 years ago with Citizens United that launched in January. Actually, 10 years ago, a few days from now today, is when Citizens United was given as an interpretation to open the floodgates of corporate money as freedom of speech to pay off any politician and literally let multinational corporations, not even just American corporations, to really dictate, like dictators, who our politicians are. And that is why they're not listening to the growing anger of the people. So what can happen to Mr. T, who's most likely to be in a second term, is that if he has a problem naturally, or if he's giving a golden parachute, he will be replaced by another thing that's over the horizon that me as a prophet person has to warn people about. And that is a thing happening in the Christian faith that has already happened in the Muslim faith. A core extremist doomsday point of view, a dominionist kind of point of view that is Wahhabism in Sunni Islam, the majority sect of Islam, coming from Saudi Arabia, and with its network of 2 generations now, its network of madrasas, holy schools, has indoctrinated what is in the traditional sense of Islamic 5 virtues. It does not believe in the one virtue where in holy war, civilians are not to be harmed. They are to be harmed and extinguished as much as anti-holy warriors. That's actually blasphemous in the traditional sense of Islam. The Wahhabists are now indoctrinating the entire 1.3 billion generations of new, young, impressionable men into that. And that has led to the core religion of ISIS, the Islamic State, and Al-Qaeda, where Islamic State was born from. That is their religious doomsday Islamic prophetic doctrine. Now, it's going to shift. That's still there. Now we're going to see the core of certain people in the Christian world take on an extremist view of Christianity. And you have Mr. T bookended by Big Mr. P, who rhymes with Pompeii in Italy, and the kind of dead-eyed fellow who's the VP, the other Mr. P, Mike P. They are both leaders in what is called the Christian Dominionist movement. It is a movement that sees the rapture as reality and other ideas of Protestant end-time interpretations of the book of Revelation. And it believes that certain major countries in the world are foreseen as like Russia and China, are destined to fight America, the good guys, in Armageddon. So they are in their own way thinking in the same terms that the Islamic doomsday cults are thinking, that they are the righteous ones that were going to defeat America and Russia and China and India and all, and march on Jerusalem and take it back to Islam and purify the world under their version of Islam. This means that in the second term sometime will be the time when the Christian dominionists make their move, and they don't have to be elected. And then things could be called into emergency, because a lot of things will be unraveling by 2024, when the last big planet, Pluto, moves into Aquarius. Saturn in Aquarius at the end of 2020, Pluto in Aquarius in the end of 2024. That is bringing the frustration of revolution and the desire to change and lift off the yoke of this established Piscean order to a fever pitch, that has been delayed in being achieved because of Uranus in its fall in Taurus. It's just in the beginning of its very long transit. It started last year, or this year, I think in May. It might have been 2018, that is. But anyway, the point being, it's only like 6 degrees. It's very early in its 30-degree transit. And it will harmoniously trine these final planets in favor of them. A lot of people misunderstand that trines in astrology, which are harmonious aspects, people just think, oh, if it's harmonious, it must be my view of what's nice and harmonious. And that's the big trap with a lot of interpreters. They don't catch themselves doing it. There were similar things happening with Uranus back in the 1930s up through into the 40s that made it harmoniously possible for Hitler and Mussolini and the Imperial Japanese to be unstoppable. Anything they did, they won. And the forces that were against them couldn't gather their senses or their forces to defeat them. But when Uranus changed and when Saturn came out and others started to come out of their Earth power signs, then a new thinking happened. Like when Uranus moves into Gemini in 2026, it will now start a 5-year period where it trines Pluto in such a ways that it will help at last bring people into one of those rare windows in world history where the masses are ready to change, when they're ready to think differently, when they're ready to question more, when they can see as a collective that they need to change. So I'm very hopeful, as dire. Well, and I would even say only at the brink of the abyss will the human race find its way to step back from it. And that begins in the second half of the 2020s. I just hope that we are not too late. If I call the 2020s the decade of, and I have a book that at Hogue Prophecy, I'm trying to get kind of a little donation from people to help me get the time to finish this epic book, which is about $12.50 or a little more. I hope to get it out this year, which is called The Roaring 2020s, Decade of Transformation or Destruction, and Destruction. And I have a link that you can see it on the website. And so I'm working on it now. So hopefully I'll have it out with your help, and then you will get a gift of an expanded illustrated version of it in a PDF file. The thing is that if we do this decade right, we will do the next thing right in the 2030s, which I call the decade of either extinction or rebirth. And we will be reborn. And there are many prophecies I'm going to be showing in this new decade that I haven't shown much, collective visions of what it will be like, who will be left, and how so many people, so many traditions across time in prophecy have seen our times and what we're about to enter. And I am going to be writing books that share their collective vision and are guiding us into ways in which we can, the core of the people who survive what is coming, they all agree, whether they are kind of stuck in their dogma about it or not, they all agree that a better world is coming, that a world of a golden age is possible with the people that pass through this gauntlet, who disconnect themselves from their attachment with the past and embrace the future.
Ladies and gentlemen, his name is John Hogue, HogueProphecy.com. John, I love listening to you, man, because you can bring stories to the table, that the way you connect the dots, and it's like, how do I put it? You can talk about poles of ticks, but you can make it exciting to listen to, right? You can discuss events with that Nostradamus flair, and I think it even adds to the cool factor because if you go back, imagine 100 years from now or a few hundred years from now, people go back and listen to this podcast, and maybe the English language has changed a bit or language has changed completely, and they're listening to it and then certain words, there's like code for certain words. So, you read scriptures and there's so many codes in there, right? Or prophecies or whatever. I think it's an additional layer of imagination, which can co-create, and it's fascinating. And I think it's really exciting. And in closing out here, so you can explain things in so much detail. Sometimes I'll ask a question and you can talk about it for 20, 30 minutes, 45 minutes to an hour. So I've got like 8 questions from the audience.
Okay.
Can we do like a rapid fire on this?
Before we do, I definitely would like to, but before I would also just like to add again a new dimension in my work, which I have not done in 26 years, but I finished my first year of it returning, is to not only read the world, but to take this whatever happens coming through me and share it one-on-one with people. And that's why if you go to hogueprophecy.com, it's HOGUEPROPHECY.com. Every default page has right at the top in red in bold font, uppercase font, have a reading with John Hogue, online reading. And there's an email link. It's Hogue Bulletin at hogueprophecy.com. You can just click on it and just put a Hogue reading. And then I will get back to you and give you the information, the current times, how to pay for it, how to do the online on Zoom. It's all very easy. And you will see this background just as you see it here on, in fact, I've had many, many wonderful people already. Hi to everybody that we've done this stuff from Rex's community and the Leak Project community. I wish you all, and all that haven't yet done it, Merry Happy New Year. And this thing that I'm talking about is something that can only, if it is a future of individual sovereignty, my readings are here to help you find your own unique way, spiritually and balanced, to find your own sovereignty, because it's in the center of your own witnessing sovereignty, what I call your Noah's Ark of consciousness. Only such an ark can glide you in the very center of your being, of the inner eye, like a peaceful eye of the storm through these coming stormy times. And so in unique ways, using a little bit of astrology and then going deeper with divination techniques, this whole energy will be for you in an hour's reading. So hopefully I will be talking with many of you in this new year. And now I'd love to do a rapid fire on these 8 questions.
Right on, man. Let's rock and roll. Okay, so the first one is from, it doesn't say who it's from, but thank you for this question. Oh, all is self. If you are here, your family, don't be a shill. That was a joke that somebody made. Oh, yeah. So somebody in the comment was saying something and they said, if you're here, your family, don't be a shill. I like that. I think that's a good comment, but that wasn't the question. Here's the question. Nobody's talking about Antarctica anymore. What's your take, John, when Buzz Aldrin made the comment, or at least there was some media that said he made the comment pure evil after he went to Antarctica? Do you remember that a couple years ago?
Well, I don't know why Buzz would say that. But what I do know about Antarctica, and I am writing about Antarctica a lot at Hogue Prophecy, I try to write about a lot of things that are overlooked, even in the community that are looking for things. I try to find the things, and Antarctica is one. And there's a lot of changes going on in Antarctica, similar but not as rapidly as what's happening in the polar regions. It's melting. It's starting to melt in a large amount of water. And that's the things that could be real wake-up moments of the 2020s is the oceans may be rising. A lot of things that have been looked at. This is my prophetic statement. I'm hopefully wrong. But but as far as the future that I'm seeing is that the things that the scientists are saying are coming at the end of the century. I've always been feeling they're coming starting in the 2020s. and 2030s and 40s, not at the end or the 21st, anyway. So at any time now, there are certain tipping points with the permafrost in the north, as well as a tipping point in the melting that's going on and creating positively negative feedback loops. For whatever reason, this psychically or not, or human induced, will keep that open. But the practical fact is that it could raise the ocean in a year or two if one of these things happens by 13 feet, which means all the ports. People, I'm actually talking about this already, that people will have to perfect the mulberry technology that they used to land forces on Normandy Beach, which was not a harbor, because they had no harbor. The Germans had all the harbors in 1944 in France. So they actually created these floating docks in a huge rectangle with an opening, and it became a dock harbor that was made of cement floating piers. And we may very well have to build similar things for our ports as the oceans rise that can move to the rise of the ocean, so that we can somehow sustain our commerce, our food transport, and energy transport.
Awesome. All right. Not awesome in weather causing cities to go on, completely underwater, but that was a good response. I appreciate that. And the next question is here: will there be any arrests or convictions related to what is going on in Ukraine, in your opinion? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't. I really, I'll put this in Nostradamus. According to that old document that is the basis of the Republic, the house where the imps are using an indictment that is like imps using a peach, are solely responsible for organizing and perfecting their argument in favor of the sweetness of their peach. But once it goes to the higher house, where the tasters are ready to taste to see whether the peach is everything the lower house wants it to be, they have absolutely no power to increase the trial or be dictated by the lower house as to how they run this testing trial. So the leading speaker of the imps in the lower house peaching may ask the leader of the higher imps in the peach house, can request, but the Constitution does not support what she is doing. So as the head of the higher house said, whether one likes him or not, he is constitutionally accurate when he says, if you send us a mess and we don't like your peach, it's not because of our judgment, it's because you have not sent us a mess that's peachable. So it's not going to happen.
Great. Thank you for answering that. This is rapid fire. This is good. The next question is from Johan, but whose shift? And she asked that question earlier, I think, when you were talking about the shift.
Your shift.
Okay.
It's the only shift that matters. That's the problem with, and this is the struggle. The shift is to individual sovereignty, which will also require, as we get deeper into this new Aquarian concept of humanity, to individual awareness, because you cannot be sovereign unless you are fully alert to what consequences your freedom and what responsibility is needed for your freedom. Most people have been trained by our societies to think of freedom as I can do whatever I want. That is not true. There are consequences. That's why we have a respublica. That's why we may have democratic leaning laws, but a republic by its very definition means that it's a country of laws. and responsibilities to laws. And if you start not following the laws of that old paper that we have based our entire republic upon, that causes trouble. I would like to see, in a practical sense, rather than my metaphysical sense of things, that I would like to see more and more people move like certain apostles called Paul or Dennis C. From the blue side, or Dr. Paul from the red side, who are constitutionalists, who, though they're very different in their views, I think would make a perfect ticket as equal to Mr. T times 2. and because if it's framed in those laws of this republic, if we come back to that, that's a good place to start. And I hope that if revolution comes again, as a number of people have predicted over the centuries, that around the mid-2020s, we would see a new revolution in this land, hopefully a Jeffersonian peaceful one. That's what I am working towards. That would come back actually to that paper of laws and rights, that rather than throw them out. So, but in a deeper sense, in the only person that can shift from an outward egocentric, oh, it's all your life is out here, at the complete forgetting of in here, this being, this mystery that is visiting Earth, never born, never died, that's visiting this Earth in this body-mind vehicle of temporary joys and driving. That's the shift that has to happen ultimately. And it will happen in the Aquarian age. And rather than this being a belief, it'll move into the science. Religion will become more scientific. It will be about your direct experience being higher than anyone's dogma. Because what happens inside you is only yours. And in a strange, weird way, it may actually link you to everybody else.
All right. Let's go to the next question now. And this is from Cheyenne. Are one of the quatrains referring to a missile from a tube, like underwater, possibly an underwater nuke?
That is probably one of the prophecies that sounds like it might be a cruise missile coming out of a submarine, hitting a fortress with sudden power, a great wall, and breaking it of a fortress. That may be Nostradamus trying to describe not something of a bigger picture, but like some of his prophecies do, they describe a little incident in a futuristic war. To his point of view, for instance, the air fleets that are run by the half pigmen, and their chants, their sounds and demands are flying around in the very air. Nostradamus is hearing them without seeing them talking in the air, and they look like pigs because they're wearing oxygen masks, because they are flying in these air fleets in oxygen masks. And if you were from the 16th century and saw a guy with a round snout on his helmet, even in the most modern jets, you might say he's a half pig man.
Ladies and gentlemen, a half pig man. Now, is that like man, bear, pig, kind of?
Well, no, he called it literally the half pig man. He's half a pig. So he's a man. Obviously, he's seeing a pilot in one of these air fleets. And if you look at it, just anytime after the show, just look at any pilot from the most modern to the earliest in the wars of World War II and stuff. The oxygen mask. You got to remember, Nostradamus is a poet. And so he's going to look at, like we might look at 400 years into the future and call a certain kind of fifth dimensional new form of visualization. Maybe we call it spherical ball eyeing, because it looks like it's a sphere where the surface of the sphere can see anything outside perfectly in an entire scope of the globe, as the inside of the sphere is looking at everything going inside. And maybe the only metaphor to explain this kind of new perception would be to call it spherical sight. Ergo, half pig man. not man in an oxygen mask who is speaking magically. He's speaking magically because there's another prophecy of Nostradamus where he says the element that is so harmful to the iron rod, which means lightning striking iron rods, after incredible efforts, is made to speak and be strung on in the air. That's a 16th century pre-industrial man trying to describe electricity being turned into radio communication in the atmosphere. The iron fish shall glide under the water, and out of which will come other armaments to the shore of the Tiber River. It is not even, he's ahead of his time there, because one of the technologies that's being considered is to turn submarines into multi-purpose landing craft. That's already in the plans and military plotting. And he's already describing something of the iron fish doing that actually foreseeing the iron fish as well. They will take a man to the corner of the moon and place him upon an alien land. That is the moon landing. So there's a lot of his science predictions that are quite stunning. There's one that I can't recite it by memory right now, but it is a description that basically describes, it could describe the sphere of the fusion atom bomb trigger that when lit is imploded upon hydrogen atoms to create a hydrogen bomb. And he talks about the sphere eating and devouring the other thing. He uses like animals. He talks about the armies against Hister will surround him, and their great beasts with great rage and tumult will cross the rivers. Most of the great battles in the latter half of World War II were the crossings of the Dnieper River by the Soviets, the Rhine by the Western Allies, the Po by the Western Allies, the Elbe into Berlin by the Soviet forces. And it's like the tumult of power, the thunder is like, the super artillery barrages. I don't know how this man was able to deal with this. He must have had some kind of meditative distance. Every once in a while, he freaks out at what he sees, like the two scourges that would never have been seen. They've never been seen before by man. Two scourges that hit two ports and create an invisible plague from within. And he says they never happened before. And the quatrain indexing imply August. They're at 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And radiation, when it starts eating away at you, starts from inside the core of you and goes out. That's some of the early discoveries they had when one man working on the Manhattan Project made a mistake, opened up a lethal dose of plutonium, and his arm started swelling up from within. He was the first person to die from radiation disease. He was one of the scientists at Alamogordo. And there was actually a really good documentary showing what happened, and he actually kind of swelled up. And they said, the doctors were saying, we don't know what to do. We've never dealt with radiation sickness before. We don't know what to do. And it was like coming up from within, the plague from within. And he died as if he is suffering from some medieval or Renaissance plague that Nostradamus used to administer. So Nostradamus takes from what he knows in the 16th century and tries to describe what he's seen.
Right on. All right. Well, folks, I got to say thank you very much for being here with us. I think we've got like 1,600 or so people watching the live stream right now, and it's just continued to grow as far as when we started versus now. So if you look at the numbers continue to rise when you're doing a podcast like this for over 2 hours, that's a good sign. So thank you everybody for being here with us. Check out HogueProphecy.com. As John said, if you'd like to book a personal reading with him, he uses astrological charts combined with his years of knowledge to put together just a wonderful power up and the mental aspects of things, I think. And also that can lead to physical and spiritual and other opportunities for you, because knowing your path is so important. One of the easy things, I'll just give you a quick example, folks. Most of you might already know this, but if you want to know your life path number, you take your birth date, you add it up, and you find out the sum of that number. So if you add up your birth date and it comes up to like 23 as an example, you take the 2 plus 3, you get 5. 5 would be your life path number. And it's if my life path's 5, and it's spot on. I mean, you look up the life path 5 and say, yeah, man, Rex's picture needs to be right there. John, would you agree with that? That the numerological, just a small, you do a lot more than that, but just that one thing is fascinating.
Numerology is one of the many divination tools. I mean, you've had my good friend Chetan Parkin talking about the human design, which is another way of looking at things. There's also the classical astrological or judicial astrology, political astrology that I use to read the world, but also can be applied with also some of the ancient things like tarot. I have a system of tarot that I use as one of the tools in the deeper going from the mind to the heart and beyond the heart in these private sessions that I do with people. That takes us in some amazing, interesting journeys. When these readings are over, I often, so just so many of you who watch Rex know, I often, when I turn off the reading, I just sigh and I lower my head and I go, wow, that was an amazing person. That was an amazing reading. And I feel blessed to have been a part of facilitating someone's own self-discovery and their freedom. And and there's been hundreds of you already who are Leak Project watchers that I just wanted to share with those who have done it and those who do, that I usually am just in awe of you after these sessions are over.
Right on. And I'd like to add to that, I'm very thankful and blessed to have an opportunity to speak with people like you, John, and to have so many amazing people interact in the live chat and in the comments and the emails. And I would like to say thank you to everybody that sends me emails. If I haven't got back to your email, it's absolutely nothing personal whatsoever. I get hundreds of emails a day. Doing all the podcasts, the majority of the work myself, it's difficult to get back with everybody. A lot of times I don't even have a chance to read them. If you want to go to the website, if you go to leakproject.com or if you go to forums.leakproject.com, you can sign up for free and you can actually leave your posts, your information, blogs at the forums section. Because I mean, I know a lot of times, John, I'll get emails that'll be 2 or 3 pages long and I won't have time to read through it. But what I do read through, I'm like, this is fascinating. People need to hear about this. If I was to take my emails and just upload them onto the forum section, people would have years of material to read and cross-reference and say, yeah, that happened to me too. That's amazing. So folks, just check it out. You can absolutely sign up on the website for free and post for free. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that want to be heard and want the information out. 8 years ago, 10 years ago, I was a blogging machine. I was leaving 10 posts a day. Like I'm 10 different topics a day. And one of these days, John, I'm going to have to bring up some of the old posts that I used to do on this specific website because they're still all there. And we'll look through some of these posts that I did 10, 12 years ago. And they kind of parallel a lot of what I talk about now. But there's been a lot of growing since then and a lot more balance. Back then, a lot more I was just researching what was connecting with what I thought was going to be. I wasn't looking at multiple variables and more of a scientific approach like I am now. It was just more of a, anyway. So
yeah, we grow. This is true for all of us. And rather, it should be celebrated. These are our steps. Yeah, I have corresponded since 2000. I have written 60,000 emails. And there's no way I can, and there's amazing things. So I concur with you. I know how it is. And I still try as best I can to answer them. And I do a lot of it on my Facebook pages too.
Right on. All right, everybody. John Hogue is his name, but you knew that. Nostradamus doppelganger, or just a clone of Nostradamus, or John Hogue. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Somebody said Clint Eastwood watches Leak Project. That's what I'm talking about. Be the change you want to see, everybody. You're amazing. World needs you.